All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with Dan Truex. Dan, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, and I'm so honored to be here. I hope I can provide value to you and your listeners in some way, shape, or form, and
Well,
not bore them.
here's you know what I love it when people say stuff like that because you've already set the intention that that's what you want to do, and so it's going to happen. We can't not have that happen when you've set the intention, and I'll set the intention on this side of it too. That yes, I want this to be a really valuable experience for anybody who gets to listen to this, and so
Yeah,
I
very
really
much.
appreciate that, Dan. And I want to start. I want to give a shout out to Joel Gandara because without him, you and I probably wouldn't even be talking. And
Oh,
what a testament right there to the power of relationships. Because when we get connected from somebody like Joel that you and I already both have a relationship with, Dan, when you and I connected for the first time, it was like, man, we picked up like we'd known each other for years, you know.
yeah,
And so,
we
and
did.
that is just such a testament to the power of right relationships there and stuff. And and it just really sets the, which of course, that's what this podcast is all about. And so I want to start by turning it over to you, and I'm going to kind of go broad with this. And the reason I go broad is because I never, for me, I don't want to set, I don't have a preconceived plan for this conversation today. I just want it to be a straight from the heart kind of a conversation because that's how, I mean, we've done over 300 episodes of this. That's how we make our biggest impact through doing this. And I know we're going to impact some lives in a really powerful way today. We're gonna through sharing your story and your experience, other entrepreneurs, other founders, other CEOs who get to listen into this, they are going to be inspired to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own lives and businesses. And so I want to turn over to you so we can have you share about what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do and the impact you're making, and also give us some of the backstory of how you got into doing the work that you do, Dan.
Sure. So, yeah, quick thank you to Joel as well. Joel is an amazing guy, and I'll say this: if you haven't listened to that episode of your podcast, go back and listen to that one first because he's a way better person than I am,
Oh,
way more amazing. He's done incredible stuff. Just he really, it truly is. I cannot say enough good stuff about him. Such a man of integrity. But sure, I'll start with my story to give everything else context. And the reason I share my story is not, I'm not special, I'm not anybody important, but what I would really share it for is to encourage, especially the starting out entrepreneur, the person that is starting out, because it can be a brutal slog at the beginning,
mhm.
without a doubt. So my story actually doesn't start as an entrepreneur. I started off in the military. Joined the Marine Corps in 1997, Marine Corps infantry. Nothing, too crazy there, but deployed a couple of times, non-combat with them. Got out in August of 2001.
Okay.
So right before September 2011, and thought I'd get called back. I did not get called back, and ended up joining the National Guard. I had a friend who was in it, said, "Hey, come join this." And my decision making process probably wasn't the most refined at the time, so I was like, "Sure, why not?" Uh, and about 11 months after that, I was in Kuwait, and then part of that initial push forward into Iraq in 2003. Went back in 2004 through 2005, 2011. But in 2004, well, actually the 2003 and the 2004 and 5 deployments, I had a couple of different people that were, relationships we'll speak about, but were part of a police department locally. I live in Lexington, and they just told these stories, and that sounded amazing. And so I decided to go do that. In 2006, I started there, and I did that and started promoting up. I was promoting up in the military, still in the National Guard to this day, but promoting up on the police department side, did all kinds of different jobs, had an amazing career with the police department. But around 2017, and this is where the entrepreneurial side of things comes into play, I started realizing that I lacked a sense of fulfillment. And I really wanted to start thinking about why that was. I started digging into that, doing some deep introspection on myself. And what I came to realize is that I was living other people's definitions of success. I was promoting up in the military because that's what people around me said was successful in that environment. I was promoting up on the police department because that's what people around me said was successful in that environment. But I lacked fulfillment. And so I started doing that introspection, and I came to realize that it's exactly that. I'd never defined success for myself and what that looked like. And I did that. I defined success. I started digging into what are my values? How do I make my decisions? What is the vision for my life? And that led to a lot of different things. But the purpose of today's conversation, it also said, hey, one of the things I've always wanted to do is start a business. And so I said, well, I don't know anything about business. But I do know something about security. So if I'm going to start a business, I better start something I know something about. And I knew a lot about security. So we started a company, and I'll get into this later when we talk more about relationships. It was myself and Marcus. So we started a company that eventually became the company now known as GuardLogic, the physical security company. We provide, you think of your security officers to places like hospitals, corporate headquarters, manufacturing, that kind of stuff. And we started that in 2018, very beginning of 2018. And we've been doing it since then. That first year, this is part of where I really want to encourage entrepreneurs because it does not start easy. We made $7,000 in revenue and it was just brutal. We have two people basically doing everything. It is so hard. And I can tell you though, that because of that relationship in particular, we have grown that company. Today we're in 4 states. We have several hundred employees and, been in Inc. 5000, fast growing.
I was going to say, I see the Inc. 5000 on the back wall right behind you there.
Yeah. Oh, it's I try to blur that stuff out, but it's anyways, but not blurry enough, I guess. But yeah, but we've been in that for the last 4 years, and 3 years, and I think we'll be in it again this year. Should be, but because of that relationship, I mean that's a huge part of it. And I'm going to tell you what we're passionate about. I think finding that passion is extremely important, and it has to be a deep focus on whatever it is you're doing, right? But for us, it's changing that reputation of security. When you think about security guards, you don't generally think, hey, this is a professional thing, or it's, there's all kinds of movies that make fun about this industry, Paul Blart Mall Cop being one of them, or whatever.
Yeah.
And our mission, our purpose is to change that reputation by providing a really high quality service and using like analytics technology, in addition to the security officers and the people. As a matter of fact, we were just getting a demo today in person of a different robot. And so we're looking at all these different things, but changing that reputation is such a critical thing for us. But I'm going to tell you, it just goes back for me to one, really looking at who I was, how I defined success, what my values were, and all those things that led to where this is today. And then in addition to the people along the way, like there is no Dan doing this. It is all those relationships along the way that has made everything that where I am today possible. Yeah. It's not easy. It was not easy. There are some, we look back on now kind of somewhat with like a nostalgic lens, and I'll remember that time this happened or that happened, but in the moment it was really painful.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm here to tell, whoever's listening to this podcast, especially if you're just starting out, that it gets so much better when you put the work in. It does. It truly does. And it's amazing where we are today. And again, that's because of the people around us that just do tremendous and fantastic work.
Yeah. Yeah. I am sure that any entrepreneur, and most entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast are established entrepreneurs. They've been around for a while. They've got to the point where, they've got sustainability figured out. They're beyond the point of needing to create cash flow for sustainability. They've got that. And now their focus is on how do I use my business to make my biggest impact in the world? But every one of us can remember those early days. I mean, man, that is etched in our minds,
Very much.
And it's, it's that growth process because we have to grow into the person that we need to become in order to be able to run the kind of business that we really want to run and make the kind of impact that we really want to make. We're not that person when we start off. We grow into that person, you know. And and that growth process, man, it never ends. I mean, I'll turn 60 years old in a couple months, and I feel, Dan, like I'm just now really starting to figure stuff out.
Yeah, what a powerful and tremendously accurate point you make. Growth, right? Like the second you stop growing, and I think a big part of that too is a lack of ego, and
Yes. Yeah.
that's one of my values is a lack of ego. But you can't grow with an ego. You
That's
have an
right.
ego and think you know everything. I'm
Yeah.
gonna like that to me is when you whatever you're doing is dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's just gonna die. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now that we've got a little bit of context set here, and that was really good. That was awesome. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of our listeners. So, Dan, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Dan, I'm really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
yeah, absolutely. And so you said two different ones, life and business, although I don't, and those are inextricably linked, obviously, but I would have two I would start with, and I'll focus on the second one more for the purpose of this podcast. But I don't think that you can get around whoever your significant other or spouse is.
Yeah.
Like, I just think there's no way. I cannot imagine trying to do this, everything that I've done. I mean, at one point, I just retired from the PD, earlier this year to focus full time on my company, but working three jobs essentially with a family, two daughters. I can't imagine that, like just doing this without her. And I will say this that a spouse is absolutely $1 million relationship. And we were joking about it before we started, but yeah, whether that's $1 million in the green or $1 million in the red, well, yeah, it could go either way. But in my case, fortunately, it's definitely $1 million in the green. And without her, like it just how could I be who I was today? There's no way I could have done the things. And I keep using I, but it truly is not an I thing. There's no way that without our relationship, we would have been able to do these things and
Yeah.
achieve these things. Without a doubt, I cannot tell you how many times she supported me, how many times I've been gone for this or that or whatever, and she has never complained. Like literally never complained one time. And to me, that is just, in many, when I stop and think about it, it is mind boggling. You want to talk about the value of a relationship with someone who 100% supports you,
Yeah.
just without question, never doubts, never questions. I mean, just always there. That's, I cannot place a value on that. Well
Amen.
beyond $1 million, I can assure
Yeah,
you that.
for sure.
Um, yeah. And then the other one I would talk about too is my business partner, Marcus Sell, and that's the one, like I said, focus on for today's relation or today's conversation.
Okay.
But man, I got lucky. I'll just tell you that. Much like with my wife, and I looked back on that. I think Steve Jobs had a quote like, "It's only possible looking back to connect the dots," or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I could say that every decision I made was intentional and well designed and thought out. But a lot of luck was there. I talked about going back and defining my values, and that definitely helped because I
Okay.
think that what I would really say makes our relationship work in retrospect is our values alignment. And there's a lot of lip service paid to values, a lot of lip service paid to values alignment. And if you're listening, please give me a couple minutes to expound before you just leave because it sounds so cliched, but it's so critically important. And it really starts out with knowing your own values. I talked about going back and defining them, but I'm going to tell you, it surprises me when I coach people how few of them have really written their values down, truly dug into what those values are, and then looked for values. You just talked about growth. What values am I missing? How do I continue to grow as a human being, as a person, to help others out? Um, or conflicting values. I identified I had conflicting values when I really sat down and that causes problems for and I'll give you the example of that. And this will probably sound, but I have better sounding values than this, I promise. But one of those values I have is security. And what I mean by security is not necessarily related to my business. It sounds like that. But to me, it's making sure the future of my family is secure, that they are taken care of. Now, on the inverse, or not inverse necessarily, but another value I had was wealth, growing wealth. And I believe that, wealth, that sounds so negative in our society today. People want to, say whatever about it, but without wealth, I think that it's really difficult to make a real impact.
Absolutely.
But what I've also seen is, and how these conflict, is that, people that generate wealth typically take a pretty significant risk. And so I have one value of security that's basically saying, don't take risk, make sure that your family's secure, take these jobs that have pensions. And then I have this another one saying, but I need to take this risk and to do this, to achieve this value. And so by going in and to digging into that, I identify those conflicting values. And that's an example of just why it's so important to know your own values. But because for most people, values, they tend to be a vague or abstract construct. Like, they don't really, like, if I asked an individual, like, hey, what are your values? Or do you know your values? They're going to tell me yes 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. But to sit down and say, no, these are the 14 values I have, and these are why, and I've dug into them, and this is what I've learned about myself. That I've met almost nobody that has done.
Okay.
And where it worked out so well in the relationship with me and my business partner was we had values alignment. Our values are so aligned, and this has led us to be able to make decisions in sync, that we know how the other person operates. That, I mean, we disagree on things, but never from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah.
Like, we don't get heated about things, and then we make decisions based on those values. I talked about lack of ego being a value that both of us have. And that's so important, because when I'm wrong, great. I just want the company to be right. Yeah. And he's the same exact way.
Yeah.
And so we can have those disagreements, but they're not from an emotional thing. But again, I would say this: until people truly know what their values are, you're never going to know if you have value alignment with anyone, your spouse, your business partner, whomever.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just don't think most people actually know their values in any real meaningful way. And that may not apply necessarily or be directly related to your listeners who, have done a lot of this deep introspection, I'm sure. But again, I would question anybody: have you sat down and truly defined your values and looked into what those are? Because it sounds simple, it sounds cliched, but sometimes cliches are cliches for a reason, and people just skip right over them because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really powerful, Dan. And you're right, because I, in doing what I do, being a connector, being a conduit of trust for the entrepreneurs in my world that I serve, what you talked about right there, the values, is so important. And also, just that trust, the trust in both character and competence, that those two trusts both need to be there, which, I guarantee you that you and your partner, you have those levels of trust with each other, that you completely trust each other's character and competence. And you also align on interests and values. And you're right. In order to be able to align on that, you have to know what your interests are. You have to know what your values are, because otherwise, how do you know if I align with this person or not? And so you have to have those same things. Otherwise, there's going to be a misalignment. And then the same is true. There's so many entrepreneurs that get into business, and from the outside looking in, it may look like a very successful business and may very well be in many ways, but yet that entrepreneur, that founder, is just completely unfulfilled because they're out of alignment running that business for whatever reason that is and stuff. And they haven't taken the time to really look at that. And you mentioned to me that, man, Kev, you are just so jazzed and so excited about what you do. That's alignment is what that is.
Yeah.
I get to do what I love doing with people I love serving, and they're not just clients, they're friends,
Yeah.
And so, but and we have alignment in interests, we have alignment in values. There's trust in character and competence. And I'm not, I'm not going to bring into somebody's who's a friend of mine or a client or what have you. The only people I'm going to bring into their life are people that I feel that will expand the relationship I already have with that person. That person is then going to come back to me and go, "Man, Kevin, thanks so much for connecting me with so and so." That's what I want to have happen. And so we got to be very intentional about all this, just like you were talking about.
Yeah, such an critical thing. I would say this, that, I mean, again, like you said, mostly entrepreneurs that are listening to this that have achieved some level of success. I would say that to a person that they would agree with the following statement is that we work best. Our best clients are ones we have values aligned with as well,
Yeah.
right? Those are the ones that I know our company works best with, that have that integrity that we value so much, that do things the right way, going into it, that make their decisions by those. There, to me, it is such a foundational aspect that has lost, a lot of people have lost sight of because of everything, all the noise around us. And coming back to that, when you really look at it and say, why is something going wrong in this? I almost guarantee whether it's a client relationship, whether it's a partner, business partner relationship, spouse, it's almost always a values misalignment.
Mhm. Yes.
There's a values misalignment that's probably unidentified. Whether that's because you don't know your own values fully and you're holding them to a standard that you're not necessarily living yourself, or vice versa.
Yeah.
But it's the root of so much pain. And going back to those simple fundamentals and looking at it, and saying, okay, hey, this is where we don't connect. Sitting down with that person, and digging into that, I'm telling you, can provide so much value,
Yeah.
such
Yeah.
tremendous value.
Yeah. If you look at this, so I'm gonna ask a question, and I'm sure there's going to be a number of things that will pop up, but I just want you to, just the first thing that comes to mind for you, but I'm sure you'll be able to come up with lots of examples. But if you look at this relationship between you and your partner, I want you to look at a situation where you personally got to make a really substantial impact. And maybe even in the moment, you were kind of like, wow, maybe even surprised a little bit. But you also know that would have never happened if not for the relationship that you and your partner have. What's an example of something like that, Dan?
I'll tell you a story about our company. And I think this answers your question, but so values alignment, we call them in our company standards of excellence, and we really try to live by them. One of the ones we have, and I'll tell you the story behind it, is we buy the bike.
Okay.
And I'll tell you the story behind that. And this is so we used to have the standard of excellence, we are family, before we buy the bike. We changed it to we buy the bike, because I don't know that any company out there doesn't, with the exception of maybe like Netflix, who specifically would tell you we are not family. We're a team, and there's some really valid reasons behind that. Don't get me wrong; he makes some really good points in his book, Reed Hastings. Um, but it sounds so cliched again, and people just don't value things; they skip over things. And we had a contractor, and they came in and they were working with us on really honing and defining these values. And so he said, "Well, tell me an example of the time that you treated somebody like family and you impacted their life, so to speak." And so, like, okay, well, there was this. We had an older gentleman that worked for us as an officer, and he uh, retired. He just wanted some extra money, and didn't know too much about his background. He was working, and over time got to know him a little bit, and came to find out that the reason that he was working for us is he just wanted to buy things for his grandchild. He wanted to have the money to do that, so he was
Okay.
working for us, and he in particular wanted to buy this motorbike for his grandson for Christmas. That's awesome. Thank you for, I mean, did an amazing job. He showed up early. He kind of helped mentor some of the younger officers. Fantastic person. And then one day he didn't show up for work, and which was extremely unlike him. And so the site supervisor started calling, couldn't get a hold of him. Our area director started calling, couldn't get a hold of him. Nobody get a hold of him. Area director called, I mean, over a period of hours. And finally, phone was answered. And he's like, "Hey, where are you?" And wasn't the gentleman, it was his daughter. And his daughter said, "Hey, I don't know how to say this, but he went out here, he put his uniform on, went out, started his truck. It was cold out, came back in, and he collapsed and passed away." Um,
Wow.
and it was just like, what do you say to that, right? I mean, I wasn't the one talking to him, obviously, but like the area director, I can't imagine. Like, there's no, and so unbeknownst to us, everybody that worked at his particular site started pulling their money together to buy the motorbike for this grandchild for Christmas.
Wow.
Well,
Wow.
at the same time, the leadership team started doing that same thing. Like the two groups didn't even know the other two groups were doing it, right? And we eventually found out, our executive team, and that this group was doing it over here. The people that, the frontline officers were doing it. The leadership team was doing it. And we just like, no, we'll do that. And the company will do that. And so we ended up, it wasn't, again, it's not a big expense to the company, right? But to me, it's like, that's such an important value, and in living those values and being able to make that impact. When I talk about reasons to start this business, like that story still kind of, it like tugs at my heartstrings a little bit.
Yep. You can tell when you're telling it. You can tell when you're sharing the story, for sure.
And over the years, we've had so many different opportunities to do that. And having the values alignment with my partner on what's important financially. And it's not about like putting every dollar into our pocket. It's about saying, hey, this is a human being who had, dreams, hopes, goals, and wishes. And we can help in some way. To me, like, that is the absolute most rewarding thing. And you can't do that, again, if you have people that are misaligned with that. If we don't have the same exact values, it's not even a question when a lot of these things pop up. Like, oh no, and we just say it now. Like, nope, we buy the bike, and it applies directly to how we make decisions in our company. We have other standards of excellence as well, but they all are decision making filters. They're so important, and you just, like, if you don't have that values alignment, then it's like one person's like, oh yeah, no, we're doing this. Like, no, we're not. That doesn't make financial sense. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is. Yeah, I don't want to live that way, and I don't want to operate that way. And so having that values alignment with my partner and the rest of our leadership and executive teams is such a critical aspect for us as far as company culture, values, all of that stuff that sounds cliched. It's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What an amazing story. And you're right. I remember, Dan, I was telling you before we hit the record button, I was telling you how, this isn't just an interview, because, after doing over 300 of these, I've come to realize that each of these becomes a tool that, like, it just, when you show up the way you do, Dan, the way you just showed up, in fact, for this whole conversation, man, it just endears people to you. And I guarantee you, we've got folks listening to this right now going, man, Kev, I really love Dan, man, and I love the way that guy shows up. And
well,
I would like to get more information on him and just what he's doing. And so for anybody who's feeling that way, Dan, are there any, like, websites, any resources we can share with them so that they can just, connect with you more and stuff?
As much as I hate it, I would just say LinkedIn, and just message me on LinkedIn and put MDR or $1 Million Relationships in your line, and I will answer it. I will connect with you. If I am so LinkedIn, I get so much spam. So put it in the subject line, and I will absolutely, and I would love to, learn from other people, get to know them, network, whatever. But what I would also love is where they tell me where they think I'm wrong and where I can improve. I absolutely value that. So if you disagreed with something, definitely send me MDR - you're wrong. And I'll definitely
and that'll get your attention.
Yeah, it will. But no, that is something that I also value, is somebody that's willing to tell me I'm wrong. Because how do I improve without knowing where I'm wrong? But not to go down a rabbit hole there, but yeah, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. And Dan, it's Dan Truex or Daniel Truex. I'm pretty easy to find. It'll match the photo that I
Yeah.
sent for the
Well,
show
I'll make
notes.
sure we include the address, LinkedIn address, your profile with the show notes and stuff too. So make it nice and easy for people. So, Dan, I mean, I want to thank you again. I mean, any last thing that you feel led to share before we call it a wrap today, Dan?
Uh, I don't have anything in particular. I
Okay.
am, like I said, honored to be on here. I would love to hear from anybody just to build a relationship and if I can provide you value,
Yeah.
and not from a monetary perspective. Just like I told you, I'm an introvert. And so it takes real effort for me to do this. And so opportunities like this, especially with people like you, who this is what you do and what you love doing, is such a tremendous value to me. And I'm so grateful for it. So I would love the opportunity just to hear from people and to
Yeah.
meet with them, and if I can provide them value or anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dan, once again, I want to just thank you for taking the time to have this conversation today and just share from your heart. And that just means so much to me. And I'm looking forward to sharing this with a lot of other entrepreneurs and stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely.